and welcome back to the show. The Katal Center for Health, Equity, and Justice is a growing team of professionals with decades of collective experience in community organizing, policy advocacy, strategy development, training political campaigns, as well as communications. Now, their goals are to build leadership and organize the capacity of neighborhood residents, as well as organizers, advocates, and community groups to effectively drive and shape systematic change. They also work to end mass incarceration, mass criminalization, and the war on drugs, as well as advancing solutions to promote and secure health, equity, and justice. Joining us now, I'm pleased to have sharing with us on this matter. I'm joined by the Director of Community Organizing at the Katal Center for Equity, Health, and Justice, Kenyatta Muzzani. And Kenyatta, good to have you.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. And for somebody who may not be so familiar with your organization, I gave a mouthful, but tell us a little bit more in layman's terms about the work of the Katal Center.
Will do. And again, Daren, you did a really great job of introing who we are. I was going to share of our 3 interrelated goals, and I'll quickly recap them and then just, again, speak in layman's terms like you had said about what we do. So again, I'm Kenyatta with the Katal Center for Equity, Health, and Justice. And as an organization, we have 3 interrelated goals that Daren shared. The first of which is to end mass incarceration, mass criminalization, and the war on drugs. And we do that because we know that so many people in our communities, especially people of color, Black people, Latinx people, have been impacted by the war on drugs. Our second interrelated goal is to develop the leadership and organizing capacity of average, everyday neighborhood residents so that they can drive and shape change. We are community organizers at our core. And so we believe that, in the words of Ella Baker, strong people don't need strong leaders. And so our mission and our goal is to really ensure that community members have the tools that they need in order to drive change. And the last goal is to promote policies and evidence-based solutions that support and help shape healthier, safer, more equitable communities. So outside of like the nice, neat things that you can read on our website, in layman's terms and in quite short terms, we are an organization, a community-based organization at that, devoted to building power with everyday average neighborhood residents. That's it. Like building power.
And when we talk about building power, I wanted to take the time, if you will, to just talk about that, because many communities lack that organization and they lack that strength. But I know that you guys really work very hard at mobilizing and galvanizing individually as well as corporately.
Yeah, and I'll talk a bit about power and the way in which we see it at Katal. And so if you look up what the definition of power is, pretty much any dictionary will give you it's the ability to make change, it's the ability to influence, it's the ability to do something different than the norm. And so when we look at power, it usually comes in 2 forms. Organized money is one form. You have enough money, you can make change, you can make influence, you can do a lot of things. And the second form is organized people. And so enough people get into a room, you already know, Daren, you can immediately start to make change. It goes from 1 person in the room to 200 people in a room, and that can easily go to 2,000 people in a room. And I bet you if you're going in a room with 2,000 people, whatever you want is going to get done if you have enough power. And you have the people power. And so as a community-based organization, our main goal is to ensure that we have power in the way that is with organized people, so that people are organized so that they can drive and shape the power that they want. And so as an organization, we really devote ourselves to reaching out to community members, looking to community members who then become Katal members and then want to work on the things that we're doing. And because we're a community-based and member-driven organization, they bring their thoughts and ideas to the table and say, like, this is something that's important to me and to our community. Let's go and make this change. And so you see that across our work. We're not only in New York City, but we're statewide throughout New York and also in the state of Connecticut. And so we have those 2 offices, both in Connecticut and in New York. And so we work across both states in order to build enough collective power of community members so that we can drive and shape change in the ways in which we want to see change made, because we know that our current society is really geared towards those that are in power that do not have power that's necessarily centered around collective power of communities. It's usually centered around the collective and organized power of money. And so we're here to make sure that community members know what to do and are able to actually execute those things.
I want to talk a little bit about the criminal justice system. Obviously, a lot of people have discussions. We've been talking about this earlier on the show. Mass incarceration, particularly in communities of color, and the work that's being done to decriminalize so many people who've been a victim of this.
Yes, and so I think a lot of people know us for our work on criminal justice reform and even largely drug policy reform. You think you shared a bit of that in the introduction to who we are at Katal, but a lot of the work that we do in New York City is really centered around transforming the criminal legal system, and we'll get to it later in talking about some of the campaigns that we're running, namely our parole reform campaign and our campaign around COVID-19 in prisons and jails. But largely, the criminal justice system is working in the exact way that it is meant to work. It is a racist and classist system, and so it does not work for Black and Brown people and poor people. It does not work for queer people. It does not work for many communities, even though you see us overrepresented in the criminal legal system and in the criminal justice system. And so we need a massive overhaul, and we need these systems to legitimately work for us in the ways that they don't actually work for us right now.
And so, as you're working galvanizing people, you're working creating awareness. Talk to me about the awareness that you're creating and really public receptivity to that.
Thank you for that. Our organizers are on the ground working directly within communities with people who have been impacted by these issues. And I'll just look and talk a little bit about the parole reform work and answer this question about, how we talk to people in the community, what's their receptiveness as it relates to parole reform. You would be hard pressed to go into any community right now in New York City where people have not been touched by the criminal justice system, whether they themselves have been incarcerated, whether their parent has been incarcerated, whether a cousin of theirs was, incarcerated in juvie and did a juvie stint. Someone went to school for 10 years and then all of a sudden they came back, and we know that school is code for they got put in prison. And so when we're talking to community members about some of the parole reform work that we're doing, people already know that this is an issue. They may not have necessarily the language that I think, like, in this society, this very heteronormative, like patriarchal society, like the language of like the criminal legal system, but they know what's going on. There are many people that we're talking to, like I said, have either had this direct experience or indirectly with a loved one of theirs who have been impacted. So we find that when we're talking with people, people get what's happening. They may not have all of the, like, again, this like language that those of us who work within the criminal legal system have the language, but people know what's happening. And our role is to really make sure that we're not lying to people, telling people like what is going on. These are the things in which we're doing. Like, what are the ways in which you see that the system can be changed? And now let's actually do that change collectively, rather than keep this, change only held within the few people who are able to access that language. And I know it seems like I'm harping on the language here, but that is a huge thing to overcome in thinking about the ways in which like Black and Brown people, the ways in which people impacted by the criminal legal system have been marginalized and kept out of those spaces. So even though, again, coming full circle, you'd be hard pressed to go into any community in New York City, especially those who are Black and Brown, and find someone who hasn't been impacted. Our role as organizers is to really develop so they see themselves as, what, I may not have the greatest, I may not have all the language right, but I know what's going on and I know what my community needs and I know what is necessary in order for us to make change. Now let's get down to business, and like all of us can make collective change so that the things that we are pushing for are community driven and are going to make real impactful positive changes on people's lives.
A little bit about the Katal program and the Block program.
Yeah, so BLOCK is an acronym for our Building Leadership and Organizing Capacity program. And so we have been running BLOCK for a number of years now at Katal. And just to let you know, for everyone who's listening, Katal, we turned 5 in 2021. So we're a young organization, young and mighty. And so BLOCK is a program that initially got started in our Connecticut location, really centered around training up youth organizers and youth leaders in the state in order to tackle change. And so BLOCK over the years has morphed into 4 main areas within our Building Leadership and Organizing Capacity program. And so the first area is our BLOCK Roundtable. And so that is a roundtable space for organizers, and youth leaders throughout the state to come together and learn the different methodologies of organizing. And so it's not strictly community organizing, which is our methodology of organizing at Katal. We're community organizers, but it's open to all organizers. And it's a space where, again, organizers can come, and it helps to create that peer-to-peer learning network between organizers. So we also have our Block apprenticeship program, which is another area. And so it's a space where we gather with individuals who are interested in becoming apprentice community organizers, and those apprentices will learn the different tools and tactics of organizing, learn about what it really takes to become an organizer, and like we put them through the Block organizer training program, the apprenticeship training program, which is a pretty grueling training program, but is incredibly impactful and successful. And so generally, we also have our coaching and training opportunities through Block. And so we have a Block curriculum, and one of our co-founders and co-executive directors, Lorenzo Jones, will often work with different organizers that are looking for coaching and looking for additional training, and myself as well as the director of organizing with Katal. And then lastly, we also have a Block fellowship program, which is a track for people who may not necessarily know if organizing is what they want to do, but that's a little different than our apprenticeship program, but really want to try out organizing in their specific, and try out organizing and see if it really fits. And so when I actually started at Katal, I started as a community organizing fellow, learning the different tools and tactics of community organizing through the Block program. And so Block is one of our flagship programs of Katal, and one of the things that we do in order to continue to build the field of organizing. We're an organization, again, that's community-based and member-driven, but we also care about the longevity of the larger field of organizing, of harm reduction, which is one of the areas we work in that intersects with drug policy, with organizing within the criminal legal system. And so Block is an opportunity for us to also connect with other organizers and potential organizers in the future in order so that we have longevity and people have those connections.
Right. And I know that one of the things that you do is, in addition to organizing, is getting these campaigns out in full front and center. There is a campaign currently going on in New York City, and I want you to let our viewers know a little bit more about the campaign.
Absolutely. So I'll start with our parole reform campaign, which is a statewide campaign, but of course we need everybody, all hands on deck to support it. And so you can learn more about our parole reform campaign. I'll just say the website, lessismoreny.org. And I'll repeat it, lessismoreny.org. And so our parole reform campaign, Less is More New York, is really centered around a piece of legislation, the Less is More bill, that would radically transform the parole system. And so what the bill would do is, one, restrict the use of incarceration for technical parole violations. And technical parole violations are often minor rules violations and occasionally minor misdemeanors. And so they are a really big cause of reincarceration in New York. And so 40% of all people admitted to prison, state prison in New York were admitted for technical parole violations. So we see that it's a big chunk of who's cycling in and out of our system. The second thing that the bill would do is that it would bolster due process. So right now, if a person is on parole and they have an alleged technical parole violation, they immediately get sent back to incarceration. And so that's just an alleged. So bolstering due process rather than just immediately sending them back. The third thing that the bill would do is that it would provide speedy hearings, so that if a person needs their hearing for their technical parole violation, they get it quickly rather than waiting potentially weeks and months, which is what can happen. And the fourth thing that the bill would do is that it would provide an earned time credit. So every 30 days a person does well and goes without a violation, they get 30 days off the back end. And so that can effectively have someone's parole sentence, and it keeps people in the community. It shortens the amount of time that people are on a parole caseload. And so the bill would do those four things, and people can, of course, check out and look at ways to get involved by going to lessismoreny.org. And of course, you can read about some of the things that our members are doing under our client section and member section, where we talk and share our member stories. And you can read some of the latest updates on the campaign there as well.
Do you find a lot of support in this area or resistance?
There's a lot of support. New York is one of the worst states when it comes to incarcerating people for technical parole violations, and we are just far behind other states. We are the worst in the country, actually, in terms of incarcerating people on parole. And if you look at the number of people and groups and even elected officials who are supporting the bill, we have over 275 groups and elected officials who support it. Those are groups that are local to New York City, many groups who are in New York State, and we even have a couple of national groups that support smart parole reform because they see the trends of what's happening throughout our country. And New York may, seem to be a leader in criminal justice reform, but the only way in which New York has led on criminal justice reform is the work of organizers, activists, policymakers who legitimately wanted to make a change. So when we are talking about smart parole reform in the state of New York, you can take a look at our supporting groups letter with over, again, the 275 individuals and a few elected officials who have signed on. And you can just look to what people are saying about the need to pass parole reform in New York State and look at all the other states in which we are lagging behind. So it's desperately needed here in New York, and many people are receptive to parole reform.
Yeah. What things should we be keeping our eyes on in this current climate?
Well, of course, I think parole reform, because that is a big issue right now, especially in New York. I would also want to take a second to really push everyone to keep track of what's happening as it relates to the pandemic and our loved ones who are behind bars. And so we also have a Free Them Now New York campaign, which is designed to ensure that people who are currently incarcerated have safety due to the pandemic. And so those numbers, the numbers of people who are incarcerated, especially in New York City jails, are on the rise. And we know that while we have the vaccine, the pandemic is still not over. There is a reason why we're doing this virtually versus an in-person interview. So I really do implore people to pay attention to what's happening as it relates to our incarcerated loved ones and COVID-19, because even though we cannot see them, they are still important, and we need to make sure that we're not letting their needs go by while the rest of the world continues to move as it relates to the pandemic. And if anyone is interested in learning more about what we're doing and just taking part, feel free to check us out at Katal Center, KATALCENTER.org, and you can learn more about the work that we're doing around COVID in prisons and jails in New York City and state.
Yeah, Kenyatta, we're going to have to leave it there, but certainly we want to talk a little bit more about that. I mean, we have to get you back and talk about that, because when you talk about COVID-19 and how it's impacted so many people, I think one thing that gets not highlighted enough are those who are incarcerated and what's going on behind those prison walls. And I know you've got your finger on the pulse there, so we got to bring you back to talk about that.
We'll be delighted. Thank you.
All righty, Kenyatta Muzzani, our guest here on the Social Justice Forums. Thanks so much for being with us, Kenyatta.
Thank you.